I prefer buying things and figuring out where to put them later than regretting not buying them. Christian Louboutin, French fashion show designer. Hello, you're listening to Talking Utter Slot, the podcast for those who enjoy the small things in life. This week on Talking Utter Slot, we'll be apologising for mistakes made, wondering why we buy what we buy, and hopefully getting ourselves invited to the seaside. I'm Scott Brownlee, occasional racer and committed collector of slot cars.
And I'm Pedro.
Nearly. This is episode 10 of Talking Utter Slot. So I mentioned that we've got to make some corrections from last time, and it's little things. And I think the title of the podcast gives away that we're not overly worried about complete accuracy on most things, but it really refers back to my visit to the South Coast Slot Car Club at Worthing. And I mentioned the impressive race management system that they were using, and I credited the sort of electronics side of it, the software side of it, to Jean, and I wasn't sure about the hardware. He's very politely corrected me. I got it the wrong way around. The software is something that he bought in, but he did make some of the hardware parts that goes to the track, etc. I think a lot of it's 3D printed. Anyway, the point was it all works very well, and it really helps run the races and the whole afternoon very smoothly, especially for people who are not necessarily familiar with the format like I wasn't. I walked in the door and it was the first time I was there. Anyway, that worked very well. So apologies for getting it wrong. It was only a little bit. And the other thing I got slightly wrong was I said that the heats were cumulative on time, and actually it was cumulative on laps. So it was you had 4 heats, and you totalled up the laps that you'd completed in those heats to give an overall position, not time. General gist of the point, I think the same was, it wasn't an individual race. I wasn't finishing second in one race and third in the other or whatever. It was just doing laps, which added to a total. And I think we said last time, it's a little bit of an odd thing. You have to go fast all the time. So it's a bit more like a stage rally. You're not really racing the people you're beside because you're trying to do as many laps as you can. So an interesting, different format to the one I was used to.
Yeah. Is there any time left for a podcast? Because that was quite an epic apology. And the more you spoke about the apology and the correction, the more I thought, I'm not sure this is a needed correction. But I understand that Johnny did correct you, or Jean did correct you. Interesting what you said about the laps thing. Because as you said it, I thought, hang on, isn't that how we used to do things back in the days of the Maidenhead Slot Car Club that I used to go to many, many moons ago? I seem to recall it was done on laps there, but I'm then wondering how they calculated parts of laps. And my pausing and thinking isn't particularly good podcast material, so I'll move on to say I also have a sort of correction in that I wasn't too sure of the whole. When you mentioned John's way of doing it, I was confused about timing that clubs use, certainly that Oxford use, and the fact that we always talk about the total duration of the heats rather than giving points to first, second, and third, which I don't understand. But I had it explained to me, and I still don't agree with it. But the reason for Oxford doing it that way, and I suspect other clubs, is that not because you get to race on every lane. We only have 4 lanes. I don't necessarily race against everyone else who's present. If we've got 8 punters there, I'm not necessarily going to race against all of them. So it's done on my time on each lap rather than how many races I win, which I can see the logic of, but I can also not see the logic of because I'm just driven by the whole first past the post thing.
Well, that was yeah. But I think not to recover the ground we did last week. I think what we're both used to, the first past the post idea, would mean that if you were safely in second place, say in a race sense, you wouldn't necessarily go as fast as you could because you want to you recognise
that's me all over. Yeah. I genuinely, whenever I manage to make it to the front, not very often, or if I've got a position and I've got some space between me and the guy behind, then I throttle back and I don't think I'm going to go hell for leather here and maybe fall off, because I have a tendency to fall off. So I think, let's not fall off this time. Let's try and do it better this time, Pedro, and let's pace ourselves. And that results in a slower time, which penalises me in the grand scheme of things, but I hang on to my place, which is what I'm happy with if I've made it to the Pody Ham. So I don't know.
It's interesting how the same thing can be different, isn't it? Anyway, I look forward to hearing from others, and the next time I go to another club, which could be early warning here, could be as soon as early March, because after my visit to Worthing, I discovered there's a slot car club just 6 miles away from me in another village.
Is it?
Yes.
Who?
So I'm going to go and visit that.
Name them.
I can't remember what they're called. It's in
Holy
because
cow.
I haven't been yet.
No,
but
you've got to
and
get there. So
I've-
knowing where you're going could be good.
I know it's in a village called the village is called Ifold, so I know it's in Ifold.
Oh.
But that's anyway. There you go. That's something to look forward to, perhaps. Another update from last time was that we were somewhat shocked and stunned and dumbfounded by the silver thingy that you found on eBay. Which, just to quickly recap for you, looked like the interior packaging from something, because it was slightly moulded to sort of be like the shape of a car, in a very general sense, and painted silver with stick-on wheels, and it purported to be a Toyota. But I gather you have an update for us.
Yeah, because I watched it in order to hang on to the URL in order to forward it to you and go, what the? I continued watching it after the podcast, and the next day I got an offer of a discount on it, 27.97% off if I wanted to make the purchase. Needless to say, dear listener, I did not make the purchase.
27.97. That's a hideously accurate discount.
Well, I suspect he had knocked a tenner off, say, and eBay had just calculated what that meant on the original purchase price. But I didn't go for it because apparently a fool and his money aren't easily parted.
And you can resist a bargain.
I can resist a bargain when it looks like that.
It does rather lead to something we were talking about. Which is, well, I should say, because I bought something on eBay this week. That's not unusual. Most weeks I buy something.
You are more of a purchaser than I am by a long way.
I did phrase that as if it was an unusual event, didn't I? But anyway, and it begs the question of what we were saying. Why do we buy what we buy? What is it that makes us buy that one and not the other one? And why is it we hanker after and search out this thing? But
so because I know what you bought this week, those are exactly my thoughts. Why did you buy that, Scott? Explain what it is, and then explain yourself. Why on earth did you? Why did I buy that?
Well, my description of it is an extremely attractive, small. Skeletric Spain model of a Seat 850 Coupe. Now, I think the original moulding dates back to 70s, probably. And I have a number of... There was one was re-released 20, 30 years ago when Matchbox branding was on that company.
Wow, did they do one?
It's the same one. So Matchbox owned the Spanish Skeletrics for a while, as it were.
Yeah.
And so they released some old moulds and called them Vintage Classics. There's an idea. And I bought one then. And then when I was buying up the part works, the Planeta and the Alitalia,
yeah.
which I managed to source from Spain at the time. So I've got a couple of them already. But this one is very lovely. It's red. It's a 1967 or something rally. It says Miniel, it's got written on it in a sort of French way, actually. A very 60s kind of European graphics. But it's lovely. It's full of charm. It's what slot cars were, not what they are. But it's got a more modernish RX motor in it, and it blasts around the track quite happily. As I say, I've got a few of them, so I'm very chuffed with that.
Have you run the new one?
I have.
Doesn't it have remarkably skinny, tiny wee tyres?
They're skinny-ish, but they're quite grippy.
Really?
So, I mean, I think to scale, they're about a foot wide, so they'd look ridiculous from a scale model point of view. But in slot car terms, they're quite narrow, and they're ribbed. But like a lot of old slot models, Step Forward SCX, Step Forward Ninko, the old tyres work reasonably well, particularly on a home track.
Is that because we think they've got more rubber in them than a lot of the... more models.
It's my suspicion that this in some way or other is related to a tree, uh, not necessarily one which died 4 billion years ago and has been crushed underneath and turned into oil. But yeah, I'm not big enough on chemistry to know how the tires are made. But anyway, that's what. And why did I buy it? Because it's charming. It's lovely. It's a bit nostalgic. I didn't have one when I was young because I didn't even know Spanish Skeletrics existed until
No.
30 years ago. Um,
I
but
wish I
it's
had
got
known when I was going on foreign holidays with my parents, because I didn't know, and I was big into the Skeletrix back then. And if I'd known that I could have gone into I don't think we ever went to Spain, French or Italian, a toy shop, model shop, and picked one up, I'd have definitely done. All I was thinking about really when I went abroad was dinky toys and things. But we might come back to my foreign metallic purchases, die-cast purchases. I have a question about that. So, okay, that little 850, it is cute, I get that. And you're claiming it runs okay. Not sure about that. I still don't quite understand the attraction of that one. But more importantly, do Planeto, Directo, whatever they were called, and Atalaya, Alpine, whatever they were, do they still exist? Do they still do that thing?
I don't know. I was very lucky at the time. In fact, a number of us at the club were very lucky because my Spanish opposite number was
Yeah.
willing, very thankfully, to have. We subscribed to four multiples of four. So every week she was getting 4 sets of this stuff delivered, and then boxing it up and putting it into the company
Internal
post room,
mail.
internal mail, and it was arriving in the UK. So I think we did that for 3 or 4 different. Certainly, I've got 4 cases and the 10, 12 cars that come with each one. Each, for those who don't know, it was a Spanish partwork. So as we get, is it D'Agostini? We get the advertising,
Yeah,
or Panini, or whatever,
yeah,
that sort
kind
of
of thing.
thing. I think it's the same company actually,
It
and
probably is, isn't it?
yeah, and it's just because obviously slot cars were big, and they went to what I insist on calling Spanish Skeletric, or SCX as we know them, and said, "Can you make some of this stuff for us?" Or and they dug out the old mouldings and they did new liveries on old stuff, and it was great. So it worked out about 20 quid a car, and you got a carry case. When you completed the whole thing, there was a plastic carry case to put them all in, and on one collection, I even got a watch. So I was very proud of my
Wow.
very cheap but very unusual Skeletric
You would have been king of
watch.
the playground with that watch where you were at school.
Oh, except there was 4 of us at the club, so not really. It wasn't
Wow.
rare in that sense. I was
You
probably
wore
the
that.
only one. I was probably the only one who wore it though.
But I made contact with a Spanish fellow who was prepared to make the purchases for me. And I'm pretty sure when you subscribed, you actually got free cars as well. I'm sure I got one or two, having committed to the cycle of 12 cars that came in 4 bits per car. I thought I got a couple of absolute on the top freebie ones as well, but I may be
I
imagining that.
think I think that was so. I think the watch was that. So if you subscribe, you got the
Yeah,
watch. Or
that
if
was
you
a subscriber
subscribe, you
bonus.
got you got the carry case sort of thing from them. So
And
um,
although I'm poking fun at you for having that, I'm not poking fun at you, but in my head I'm poking fun at you for buying that 850. I have to confess, of all the Planeto, Directo, whatever they're called, the part work stuff that's been through my hands, there's only a few that I still have, and one of them is a Fiat Panda.
yeah.
They did an issue of it that had a Fiat Panda, and I kept that one.
Well, I
And
think
I
that was
can
the.
promise you that one doesn't go around the track very well.
Oh, I've got a
Not my
few of
one.
those. I've got a few of those. I
Of
think for
course you
me
have,
that
Scott. Of course you
that
have.
was the joy because you couldn't get. I mean, we're talking 15, 20 years ago. So a lot of
Are
these
we?
models had
Oh,
long since gone out of production, and you couldn't get them. So to get a modern, new one with tampu printing and all that good stuff, this was far cheaper than buying something even at that stage off eBay.
now, it
What
always struck me that it was quite a cheap way of buying cars, and it always annoyed me that in the UK, when you had that part work kind of malarkey, it was you'd get a TV advert that says week by week, each issue builds into a fantastic model of the Titanic, and you looked at it, and if you bought them all, you'd spend something like 500-600 quid and only have a iffy model of the Titanic to show at the end of it. Whereas
Absolutely.
the Spaniards, you paid what was it, tenner a month, tenner a week, and you eventually got a decent car out of it for not over the odds money.
I exactly. That's which is why I was, as I say, eternally grateful to my Spanish colleague who indulged us for what must have been about 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
That we otherwise, I mean, you can get them all now on eBay, and I think again as things have progressed and traders have come and gone, so they're not unobtainable. But at the
They're
time,
fit. They're rare, I would say. I do see them. I've had various eBay searches saved. Obviously, I'm interested in Slotcast. That's just a given, I think. Um, but they do turn up, but not that
I, I
often, I
think
suppose.
that'll be why you're doing a podcast about slot cars if you're interested in them.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, that makes sense now you say it.
So, why do you buy what you buy?
Well, that's a very good question. I don't know. Why do I buy what I buy? Because I'm interested in motorsports generally. And so, because I cannot, I mean, every time I do Euro Millions, which I do reasonably regularly when it gets to a certain amount, I have certain standards and I won't buy a ticket for less than, I don't know, 30 mil. Um, I tell myself that one of the things I will do is sponsor a some kind of motorsport entrant, be it probably GT3 type stuff, British GT Championship, maybe. Um, so basically, I'd like to be a racing driver. I'm not good enough to be a racing driver, but I can, and I can't. I'm not good enough, and I can't afford to be a racing driver. But I can get halfway round a circuit when it's 1/32 scale, and I can afford to have all my dream cars, all my dream racing cars. So I think it's because I'm a failed, well, not even attempted, because I'm a motorsport wannabe. I've ended up with Scale X-Trix, which is pretty damning, isn't it?
No, no, I think I mean to just twist that a little bit on a positive note. So rather than
Oh, I'm not
not it
complaining.
be, I'm going to say it's not second best to what you could have been. Although, by the way, if you do win the 38 million, you can do
Mhm.
your own version of the Michael Fassbender Road to Le Mans. So we can have
Pedro's Road to Brands Hatch.
well, I was going to say Pembrey because I love a bit of alliteration, but anyway,
Oh, okay.
Pedro's path to Pembrey, um, in some classic Jag for the VSCC, that sort of thing.
Ah,
Anyway, I've lost my thread now. I was so impressed with my alliteration that I lost that thread, which is a terrible thing to admit. But
excuse
what
me.
I was going to ask was, you say you're a general motorsport fan.
Yeah.
But you don't buy models of everything. I mean, we both like GT3. We like endurance racing in general. So again, the aforementioned Michael Fassbender series. I really, really want a green 911 GT3 because of that. But you don't. I mean, you'd confessed, and I think it was good of you to confess. I think it's good to get these sort of guilty secrets out. You told me that you've been watching F1 testing.
Yeah.
So God knows why. I mean, F1 races are bad enough, but F1
But I
testing.
also told you I ended up with the conclusion of why am I watching? Well, watching the testing is all right. Watching the pundits, I've realised I've reached a certain age, and I am sufficiently grumpy, and I'm cynical. But all the web links that I followed during testing, and a lot of the YouTube video clips that I watched, they were basically just clickbait, made up stories. Not entirely made up stories, but they were taking a tiny thing and making a mountain out of a molehill. And basically, F1 testing, you can't tell a great deal. The top three are probably still the top three, and the other guys are going to mix it up a bit. But until we actually get to Bahrain for the proper weekend, we won't know for sure. So what was the point in me watching all that testing and watching Ted Kravitz talk nonsense? There was a video with Ted Kravitz where he just had an iPad on a stand and he flicked through showing pictures and he talked about them. And sometimes he talked about he couldn't find the picture he wanted to talk about. And I thought, why am I watching this awful cheap TV?
I was going to say, I was just the listeners are probably thinking much the same at the minute.
Yeah,
No,
why am I listening to this awful cheap podcast? What's going on with my life?
let's
Point
th-
taken.
Thank you for listening.
We just lost a whole load of listeners,
No, no.
and
I
I
think we
sent
just,
them away.
I think we just disrespected them, but trying quickly to get the situation back.
Never
Given
the
that you are
profession.
committed enough to F1 to watch and be interested in F1 testing, are you now, or have you recently bought a modern F1 slot car?
Well, last year, yes. Last year I bought a couple of. I started off with one Polycar generic F1, and with the avowed intent of putting some Spanish decals on it and turning it into Alonso's Alpine, which I did do, and I'm very pleased with the results. Back then, we didn't race them at Oxford. I've managed, campaigned, and achieved getting them on the roster so that towards the end of our current rotation, we will be doing Polycar generic F1s, and which means I have to finish the other one that I bought, which I was turning into an Aston Martin. So, and I do buy the classic Polycars, not a lot because they don't knock them out that quickly, but they have a draw to me because they're close to my childhood ones, the cars that I remember as a child, close-ish. The BRM that's coming out is a must-have simply because my very first Scalextric set was BRMs. I have no great desire to buy the NSRs because I think they look just too wrong. They just look, they don't look quite right. But I have a Scale Auto. I've mentioned it before on this very podcast. Nakajima's Scale Auto is coming my way as soon as it is released, and a strong temptation to pick up another one in the hope that somebody does some Jordan decals for it, so that I can turn it into a nice green machine. Because that I do believe I saw it referenced somewhere on the interwebs is one of the prettiest F1 cars there ever was, and
Now
that's just
that's
end of.
that's really interesting. So you've covered off several reasons for buying. So there's, I don't know whether the Alpine was because you like the car or you like the driver, maybe both,
Maybe both. Yeah.
maybe both. Um, you mentioned Nakajima, so it's like there's a nostalgic reason for
Yeah.
you wanting that
I
one.
don't know why. I always loved it when Murray Walker got excited, and it didn't happen very often about Nakajima's performance or the Mercurial, as he used to describe him, Jean Alesi. The Mercurial, Jean Alesi. Can't do the impersonation. Yeah, there's what is that? That's childhood reasons for buying those.
Well, then you mentioned delivery. You wanted to do the Jordan one, so it
Yeah.
was there was livery reasons, there was nostalgic reasons. Your first set, there was so, but most of it was about old stuff, not modern Formula One. I didn't watch any of the testing. I saw some pictures because it's unavoidable when you're into cars. These things get served up for you. And what I was struck by was all the cars. They look the same, but they all appear to be painted the same, which is to say they're not very painted. They all seem mostly black. And a little bit of investigation on this, I discovered that it's to save weight. So I was astonished. I mean, they're getting tens of millions of dollars from these companies to represent them as a kind of fast moving billboard. And they've somehow or other managed to convince them to give them the money, but no, we're not going to put your corporate colours on the car
But they've still got
because
the
it makes it
logo.
a bit heavy.
They've still got the logos on. I think you're. No, they're not all black. I mean, the Mercedes is infamously black. But I mean, the Williams is blue. The Aston Martin is green. The Ferrari, controversially, is red. So there's still paint out there. Dulux won't go out of business just after this one season.
Yeah, but I think it's, can if they can't, and maybe they can't. It's a complicated thing in Formula One car. But I mean, how much does the paint weigh? What, a few
Well,
kilograms maybe?
okay, so I did watch. I watched a YouTube video on that very. Well, it was discussed. I think it was Ted Kravitz hassling somebody from Mercedes, and he was trying to be woolly. I think about the answer, 3 to 4 kilos, which struck me as a bizarre amount of paint. Why don't you spray it on really thin like I do on my white kits? Three to
I
four
think
kilos of paint.
I think they do. In fact, this is I used to go. One of the guys used to come racing at Liphook. His job was painting McLaren Formula One cars,
Oh wow!
and at the time they would come back and be completely stripped and repainted, and that was in the days of the West sort of faded silver, black, and red flashes. So quite a complicated livery.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, if you're listening, Mick, well done.
The other thing, why do I buy what I buy? The other pleasing thing from this weekend was the 9 hours of Kyalami. which I tuned in for, not the whole 9 hours, but I dipped in and out, watched a little bit of the quali and then bits of the race. And GT3 racing appeals greatly because they look, F1's great, but they're just mad devices. But GT3 is much more, you might just see something that looks vaguely like that on the road. I mean,
It,
Audi R8s are relatively common, he said. They're not really. And an AMG GT3 does appear on the roads occasionally. But they have an attraction because they are the now. They're not retro, they're the now, and I like them.
I think GT3 is the modern Group 5, isn't it? So
Yeah,
the
very
silhouette
much. Yeah,
looks familiar, but they're slightly bulky and they've got those arches. Whereas Group 5 was mostly kind of crazy cardboard box extensions.
yeah. Group 5 was
Now it,
madness, bless
yeah,
it.
now it's
GT
all
now is,
swoopy CAD
yeah,
carbon. Yeah,
it's a bit
um,
tame, but it's still gutsy endurance racing, which I like very much. And I said in our kind of like we don't script this, but we do talk about what we're going to talk about before we talk about it. And I mentioned enjoying John Watson's commentary because he's like a slightly dodgy granddad. I think. Oh God, is that slander? Uh,
yes,
dodgy as in he doesn't always string his sentences together properly, or he opens his mouth before he's really thought about what he's saying. Wonder who else does that. Um, but I don't know the other dude, but I love them. The commentary is brilliant, and it makes me think of dear old Murray Walker and some of the things he did. And he's enthusiastic, and occasionally he'll be a little bit sarcastic as well. Like he mentioned something about the what the spectators were putting on the barbecue at one point, which is a nice bit of fill in.
I did dip in and fast forward through the 9 hours from Kyalami. And just for those who haven't done that, there were 11 entries, one of which fell out halfway through. So you have to feel, and it wasn't particularly a nip and tuck race because
No.
whatever happened, they were kind of in their positions and they stayed in it. So I did feel for the commentators for having to do 9 hours of live commentary on just 10 cars. So yeah, I can see why they would have descended into discussing the barbecues because there would have been not much else to get to talk about. I can name drop here. I met John Watson. In fact, I could go so far as to say I worked with John Watson. My final day working for Peugeot Talbot back in 1989 was at the British Grand Prix on the Saturday, and we had the Peugeot Cup or 309 Cup or whatever it was called. Anyway, a whole field of 309s, French domestic championship. God knows why they then booked it as a support race for the British Grand Prix, particularly as it was the weekend of them celebrating the French Revolution, independence. Can't think of the proper name of it. Anyway,
Revolution.
so we had a paddock full of French mechanics and drivers away from home, wanting to celebrate. But we had two celebrity stroke guest cars. One was a very quick journalist who actually you could probably describe him more as a racing driver who also wrote, a guy called Mark Hales, and John Watson. And so I had to go along, and I was nominated since I was leaving, and it was a Saturday. I got sent along to look after and babysit the entire lot. So I got to sort of meet John and talk to him. He was charming enough. I think he was understandably a bit concerned that he was showing up, going to be sitting in a car racing, putting his life at risk or injury, and something he built by people he didn't know, and surrounded by other racers he didn't know. So my memory doesn't extend to what the results were.
Oh, that was my question.
Sorry. Google is your friend. I don't remember. The only thing I really do remember about it is arriving there and the TOCA representative for the support races wanting to berate somebody because the aforementioned French guys in the paddock had been letting off fireworks in celebration of Bastille Day. That's what I'm trying to say. Bastille Day.
Okay.
And you can imagine letting off fireworks even then back in the late 80s inside a Grand Prix paddock was somewhat frowned upon. So anyway, that's a bit of name dropping.
That's a good name drop.
Thank you very much. Which is why I've got a John Watson Brabham. Mainly it's because it was in the aforementioned Altaia set. But I will be buying a John Watson Brabham when the new Skeletric one comes out.
If I buy one of the new Brabhams, I will buy the one that doesn't have the fan. Excuse me, about to cough. Sorry.
That's the John Watson one.
Oh,
It's
is
a
it?
little bit.
Oh, yeah,
It
yeah.
is, yeah,
Sorry.
because the
Yeah.
number two. It's a really interesting one, and I think this badly segues into where we're going in the next piece about the choice of things that get made as models.
Hang on,
And
Scott.
there's
If only we had like segue music, we could like play some music, and then segue into something. Sorry, that makes a very bad segue. Me interrupting you, as you were saying. Oh no, David.
what I was saying was there's a kind of commonly held belief that the slot car manufacturers want to get multiple liveries out of any mould so that they can earn back on the investment cost of doing that. So you see cars which have got multiple liveries on them. That's great. That Brabham was used for 1 year. As far as I'm aware, was never sold to any privateer team, and basically has two versions: one with a fan on the back, and one without a fan on the back. So that's really interesting that they've invested in that, and I presume the fan on the back must be a bit of a different moulding to the one that hasn't got it. But it got me. The other thing that got me thinking was, as a class for racing the other week, was this sort of classic front-engined Skeletric, and one of the options was an SLR Mercedes, but the Uhlenholt, is that the one, the closed coupe? So the familiar one, the Mille Miglia, the open top one, with Fangio, Stirling Moss, all that good stuff. But they also did a model of the closed coupe. Now to my understanding, it's a completely different moulding. I mean, sure, the bits of the car are the same.
Sorry,
but,
who's they?
Skeletric. And they must have done this 10 or so years ago. And there is just that car. I don't believe it raced. I believe it was a kind of one-off car, a road car. And it got me thinking: is that the most obscure car that's ever been made, which didn't have multiple liveries?
Well, I think there's probably several. I can't think of any, but I imagine there's several that have been made that don't have multiples. But you're right. The Brabham is curious because I mean there's extra work involved in getting that fan to spin. There's extra tooling in producing that model. And then the only real options they have are in sort of presentation boxes for the same livery.
Well,
It is a bold one.
Yeah, I mean,
And does it mean it doesn't actually cost as much as they make out to make a model?
No, I don't think. I think it's fairly expensive to do, and I think relatively, it must cost what it costs. And I have no idea, but let's say it costs 25 grand or something to make the tooling. Then you've got to sell a certain number of cars at a certain profit margin in order to start making that back. And if you say a 911, you can make 20 liveries of it, then great, that's paid up. Something like the Batmobile or the Lady Penelope car, I guess there is only one of those, but they're going to make a lot of them because it will sell beyond the normal racing collecting sort of thing. But when you get into something which is a historic racing car, interesting. In fact, maybe we would get the chance to ask someone directly about that sort of thing, so that we became a little bit more knowledgeable. So, and you would get the chance to give him his £3 back.
So basically, you're saying, when I see Simon and before I hand over the money, have a list of questions ready for him to answer.
Well, yes, basically. Well, no, that's wrong. I don't.
Yes.
I think. I mean, we were talking earlier about you were tuning your Bastos Rover, and you were bemoaning, I think is the right way of describing it, the way certain things were done to manufacture the car. I shouldn't be speaking for you. I should let you. You were tuning your Rover, Pedro. Tell us what you found.
Well, as I was tuning it, Scott, I was bemoaning the fact that it's made in a certain way, which is really annoying when you're trying to tune it. My issue, as we discussed it, was curiosity with the fact that Scalextrics do say they make toys, except the Bastos presumably isn't sold as a toy because it has Bastos slapped all over it. So tobacco sponsorship means it can't be a toy, it's got to be a model. Yet underneath, it's still very much toy. And they do the things that I want to know if there's a sort of day one of being a modeler at Scalextric, is that you're handed a folder that says, okay, anytime a Mabuchi is used, then the interior tray must have these two fiddly little bits of plastic going either side of the noise suppressor thing, which sometimes will go either side of the noise suppressor thing, and then occasionally, when it's assembled, will crush the noise suppressor thing and cause distortion in the interior tray and cause havoc. And that you must always support the bushings with these little two prongs that come down out of the interior tray, and they're just surplus to requirements, I think. So I am more and more, I'm torn with Hornby and Scalextrics because they're making models very much aimed at you and me in terms of the subject matter, and they're underpinning them with the basic toy stuff, which is a bit frustrating. But I have tuned my Bastos. I did give it a wee run. It's not got the fastest motor out of all my Scalextrics, and I might see to that, but it ran really well and it looked so cool, and I was very happy. Look at my
That's
little
good.
face. Look at my little
That's
face. I'm smiling.
well, happiness is what it's all
Thank
about.
God it's
as
a
we
podcast and not a YouTube video.
Well, from episode 11. No.
Ah,
I think that you hit the nail on the head, isn't it? It brings us joy. That's what it's about. It brings us joy. I was going to say, I think I know why they make those prongs above the bushes,
it's to hold the
but
bushes
rather
in,
than
isn't it?
well, it's transportation because this thing is put in a box and chucked on a container, shipped halfway around the world, put in a van, postage. This thing gets bounced around all over the place. We look at them and think it's arrived and we've unwrapped it and we're looking at it with kid gloves and we place it on our track and we worry about whether the wheels are a millimetre too. It's got to have survived being made and shipped round the world. As
No,
well.
I'm not having that. I'm not having that at all. Sorry, but Slot It gets made and chucked around the globe. Carrera, let me list a whole load of 132nd slot car manufacturers. They all get chucked around in containers. They don't all have these silly little prongs holding the bushings in, and I think
Okay.
that's the reason that they're concerned that in a accident, which they believe their cars may have, they may come into high-speed interaction with a skirting board or a sofa or a chair leg or something. They're concerned that the bushings pop and the car suddenly becomes broken and is seen as not good value for money, and so they put these silly little pieces of plastic in because they're cheap on the bushings. That's my
Oh,
theory.
okay. Well, I think we should ask. I think we should go down. We should have a day trip to Margate, get some ice cream, and hopefully speak to somebody. So if anybody from Hornby's listening, we'd love to come and visit and have a chat with you guys.
You're going all out for an invitation this week,
I'm
aren't you?
going on. Yeah, exactly. No, I think it's the next stage for talking utter slot. Actually, is that we reach out into the industry, and start to engage more fully.
I thought you were suggesting we go on the road and do shows, rather like radio. This will mean nothing to global audiences, but rather like the BBC Radio 1. What did they call them? When they went on the road and did broadcasts from Brighton Beach or Blackpool Beach or...
The Radio 1 Roadshow. There wasn't
That would be
much
it. That's
imagination.
what they did.
The
Roadshow.
Radio 1
Brilliant
the
idea.
Roadshow.
We're going on the
So
road. We're going to do a show. Call it a roadshow.
talking utter slot on tour. And then we can. I think suddenly when you're talking about beaches there, I thought, has anybody ever put up a slot car track on the beach? I mean, I've
Well,
put
no,
it in my
'cause
garden.
sand gets everywhere. It gets in your sandwiches. It gets in between your toes, and it would get between your pinions.
Yeah, well, I mean, you look at some of the Spanish rallies when they've got all the snow and sand and
I
stuff
know.
on them. They're
Always
fantastic.
impressive.
It is very impressive. So maybe we need to. I suppose power would be a challenge. Anyway, we don't need to go to Margate in the summer and slot cars on the beach. But I think there's a whole load of interesting things that we believe or we wonder why they do it, and it maybe comes down to the whole toy thing.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't. It's just I don't. I think the use of the word toy is not a negative. And maybe it's a difference. It's a bit like Jaffa cakes. Is it a biscuit or is it a cake? Is it a toy car or is it a model car or is it a racing car. That kind of definitions of these things, and maybe that's what makes a difference in how you manufacture them and the cost of manufacturing them, and how the end user. When I went to, again, slightly name dropping, I took my 3 Series company car down to Margate to be measured up for making what then became the BTCC model of the E36. So this would have been early mid 90s. And,
Hang on.
And
Oh, you were working for BMW at the time.
I was working for BMW at the time.
Yeah. Okay.
So
That
I
makes more
met Simon Kohler. They're all, maybe you have to be called Simon. Anyway, Simon Kohler, who's still there now. And at the time, he was very emphatically, no, we don't make cars for old men. We make a toy.
Yeah.
And the reason that was interesting at the time, of course, was you'd got Ninko just coming along. I think Fly were maybe just on the horizon, and there was just the beginning of what we know now to be a very big market for grown men playing with toy cars. Clearly, they have now embraced that because, as we've been saying earlier, there's a lot of models there which are very clearly directed to people in our age group, our demographic. So it'd be interesting to hear what how they assess how many of those kind of customers they've got versus the Toys R Us, Woolies, and other retailers which have gone out of business who are going to bulk buy for the Christmas market.
But hasn't Simon said? Hasn't it come out that what we would consider the hobbyist market, i.e., you and me, and our listener in America, is very, very small. I mean, that's 3 people just there. It's very small, and the real business is in the Christmas sets. I thought that was said a while ago. I don't know if that's still true, because if it was a while ago, maybe the market has moved. I mean, the market surely is always moving a bit. Maybe the Christmas sets aren't quite what they used to be these days.
Well, I can't help. I mean, obviously, I spent all my career in the full-size car business, and whilst the media and the enthusiasts got very excited about the go faster versions, actually the bulk of what you sold was something that went to rental and fleet markets, and lots of vans and pickups and things. So the business was about both sides of those things. You made the stuff that you made a lot of, and you were tight on margins, etc. And you also made the things which were a halo product and said something about what you were and what you wanted to be. I guess, because I have no other information, that the slot car companies are kind of the same. But I have said before, I think the NSR, Scale Autos, Slottits even of this world, great as they are, they exist because there's a bedrock of people who have been given or bought toy slot cars, and they've played with them and they want to take it a little bit further, and they eventually get into that side of the market. So just in the way that Ferrari and Porsche rely on people learning to drive in a Fiesta, so Slottit depends on somebody having loved but got frustrated with their Hornby Mini.
Well, that's a very interesting and kind of obvious, but well put point.
Was that almost a compliment?
It was actually more. It was more like, well, why didn't I think of that? Because you're right, Slottit. There is a whole industry, but we don't know how big it is, obviously, that supports the hobbyist, and that is riding on the coattails of the Carreras and the Scalextrics of this world. And yet there is a market that keeps Maurizio in whatever aftershave Maurizio splashes on.
I wouldn't say it's riding on the coattails. I'd say it stands on the shoulders of. In the sense
I see what you've done there. Yeah. Interesting imagery.
So I think whether the frustration there for this little Carrera Scalextrics of the world is, well, why can't we have a bit of that?
Yeah, because Carrera and Scalextrics make very nice models. I mean, both of them, I would say, make nicer models than NSR. Decals for headlights, nonsense. Both of them are quite capable.
Peter, let it go.
No, I will not let it go. Not until episode 20, maybe. Both of them make very nice models. And I mean, that Bastos Rover, I think, is a really peachy model. There's some corners cut here and there, yes, which maybe the Slottits of the world wouldn't do, because he's quite fastidious at getting his shells correct for the livery, isn't he? But yeah, it's an endless frustration, and I don't think it'll change. So just deal with it, young man. Young man,
Well, it's
old
it's a
git.
it's a tiny it's a tiny industry. They were dealing with, even if you combine, if you forget about all of the HO 164th, all the real toy stuff, and I gather that's where the real volume is.
Well, I've heard that as well.
Uh,
Yeah,
yeah. But if we forget about that, and we probably shouldn't, but if we forget about that, then we're dealing with a real niche here of toy carness, and but it's lovely, and it gives me a lot of pleasure, that's for sure. So thank you, all of you out there who are making slot cars. You make an old man quite happy and relatively poor.
in the process, you make me happy and have committed me to poverty.
Well, again, if I come back to where we started, that opening quote. Now we didn't plan this, but that opening quote. I prefer buying things and figuring out where to put them than regretting not buying them. And that's what we're doing. I think that's what
Hit
I'm
me
doing.
with that. Hit me with that again, because for me you broke up, and I'm not sure whether that's almost certainly been recorded. What? Because I was intrigued by that quote that you found from nowhere. What was it again?
I prefer buying things and figuring out where to put them later than regretting not buying them.
That is quite an interesting philosophy, isn't it?
If you
But we're
when you
out of
do come to
time.
it,
Tune in
that's
next
it.
week
Yeah.
for
That tune in next week for storage solutions for slot cars. We probably have gone on long enough. So,
have.
thank you for listening to episode 10 of Talking Utter Slot. We enjoy doing this. Hopefully, those of you who are listening enjoy listening to it. We thank you very much for doing so. We're going to carry on, and hopefully, if you want to suggest things that you'd like us to look into, or if you want to tell us how bad we are at this, feel free. The comments section is, as it were, open. Largely ignored, but it is open.
The how long we've gone on. The little counter was slightly blocked on my screen, so I wasn't aware of it. But I was aware that we were going over possibly, because in these headphones my ears are getting remarkably hot. I need to take these headphones off. My ears are cooking. So
Is that an old man thing?
I think so, probably. Because your ears keep growing, don't they? That's the only bit of you that keeps growing. Is that true? So I'm basically
That's not.
hothousing my ears in these headphones at the moment. Really.
I think that's not for this.
Jumbo-esque.
But that's for another podcast. Getting old and how to put up with it with Peter and Scott. Right.
Okay.
So that was episode 10 of Talking Utter Slot. If you have been, thank you for listening this far, and we'll see you soon.
If they haven't been listening, how do they get to... Cheers, Scott. Bye.
In this episode 10 of Talking Slot... Oh,
the perfectionist is coming out, isn't it?
it's not a lot. The opening bit went quite well. Don't you dare put all of this in the podcast, okay?
I promise. I promise I won't put this in the podcast.
You evil man. Right, let's try again.